Welcome back to this video, guys, where I want to talk about how to counter Maliss, where to handtrap Maliss, where to board break Maliss, how to deal with Maliss, the new threat in the meta. It is very important here that it's not that easy to basically say where the best possible moment is to use specific handtraps, because this is a very complicated deck, and I'm suggesting that if you do not know what Maliss does exactly, go and watch my combo guide video, just to, even if you don't want to play the deck, just to understand what the deck does and how the combos work in the basic sense, because then it's way easier to use hand traps and board breakers correctly, or more hand traps, I guess. The links in the description and in the top right corner. And yeah, without further ado, let's hop on right in. We have the hand traps and the board breakers that I want to talk about here in the extra deck slot, or in the side deck slot, I guess. And here is a Maliss deck list. Don't you wonder, for example, there are only 2 Ash Blossoms in here because I needed to put one down here. So don't copy this deck list. There's a deck list in the combo guide. Okay, let's talk about the most useful hand traps. You can see that, for example, Droll and Lockbird isn't in here because it's not that useful against Maliss. This depends a bit. I guess you can play Droll and Lockbird if, for example, they play the Allure of Darkness variant and they start with Allure of Darkness. Then dropping a Droll is not that bad, because then you can basically negate this red ransom search, which is otherwise kind of the only search that Maliss is doing for the field spell or for the Maliss in the mirror. You could also, with the Droll and Lockbird, activate it after a Chessy Cat, which banishes a card from hand and draws 2. But all in all, Droll and Lockbird isn't that great, and I guess I don't have to tell you that you should roll at the first time that you can roll, obviously. So I don't really need to talk about Droll in this specific instant. Let's talk about Bystials. Let's say you have Bystials. Bystials can be very effective against this deck, especially if you can remove one of the base bodies from the graveyard that has already been banished. This is very important to keep in mind. So a situation in which you definitely want to use your Bystials, let's say, for example, they started with the White Rabbit. In the White Rabbit line, it is the case that we need to banish both of the monsters that we get to the field, so they can't come back again, and we have to go over the Splash Mage. In a lot of combo lines, the Maliss player will need to go over the Splash Mage, and the Splash Mage basically means that he needs to target one of the base Maliss monsters to resummon them, so that he can then go into his Link 3. This is something that you really have to understand if you want to use your interruptions right against Maliss. One of the core concepts against Maliss is that you always want to keep them off 3 bodies, or also like a Splash Mage and a Maliss body would also work, because this is Link 3, to go into the Link 3 Maliss extra deck monsters, because if they can, for example, get out of a Ransom or a White Binder, this can extend the combo to such a point that you can't really stop them anymore. This does not have to be the case, but this is a very good thing to keep in mind. So if you have interruptions from your board that you build on your first turn that can destroy cards, keep in mind that you want to keep them off 3 bodies, or basically a Link 2 body and another Maliss body. Keep also in mind that for the Maliss extra deck monsters, your Maliss opponent needs a Maliss name, so having a Splash Mage on the field together with any other Cybers monster that is not a Maliss will not get them into their Maliss monster, so keep this in mind, is very important. Okay, Bystials. So let's say, for example, your Maliss opponent activates Splash Mage, targeting one of the Maliss monsters in the graveyard, let's say a Dormouse, and here it's important to check whether the Dormouse has already come back with its own effect, because if it has, this is one of the best moments to use a Bystial, because then, and this is what I just explained, you keep them off the Maliss name and of the body, so that they are only on the field with the Splash Mage, which means they can't go into a Link 3. Obviously, if they have extenders like the March Hare, or maybe Allure of Darkness, banish another Maliss name from the hand, or maybe Bystials themselves, this can be a bit complicated, but this is one of the best options or best times that you can actually use the Bystials. So any Bystial, Magnamut, all of the other Bystials, the prime spot is to basically keep them off 3 bodies. You can also wait with your Bystial if they should play the Firewall Dragon Darkfluid version to banish from the graveyard the Cybers, the Desavir Worm at the end phase, and then there's basically one less spell and trap negate on the end board. And I think the Firewall Dragon Darkfluid is something that you will see a lot, especially early on. We have Artifact Lancia. Just to quickly say this, if you have Artifact Lancia in your main deck, this is one of the best counters, or the best counter against Maliss. Unfortunately, it's not that great against other decks. It is nice against Kriston as well, and you can, for example, also Artifact Lancia if your opponent wants to call it by your Maxi. So there are some use cases, but obviously, if you have an Artifact Lancia, I would suggest not... It depends a bit, right? If everyone is on the Allure of Darkness package and you see this a lot, then I would drop this Artifact Lancia in the draw phase, because if you wait and your opponent activates Allure of Darkness, and then you go Lancia, which you can, and you should do in this instance, I guess, then you your opponent does not need to banish a hand card because he can't, but will still draw 2 cards, so that's a bit suboptimal. In other cases, I would definitely wait for them to commit a play. Let's say they have a hand of 5 and they have only 1 starter, let's say the Maliss and Underground, which is a suboptimal starter. And they activate Maliss and Underground. At this point, you want to chain the Lancia because then they have already used up one of their starters. Same goes for something like the Dormouse. Dormouse activates effect, you go Lancia, and then you can kill the Dormouse because it remains on the field, so you get rid of one of their starters. This is also something to keep in mind, and this is why I suggested you go ahead and watch the combo guide. It's also important to understand what they are starting with, right? So they starting with a Maliss and Underground just means that they probably don't have a normal summon body that can start the combo, something like the White Rabbit, something like the Dormouse, or maybe also a Chessy Cat with another Maliss name in hand. This is important to take note of because this basically tells you what could be in the hand or what the other cards in the hand could be. So at this point, for example, if they go Maliss and Underground start and banish a Dormouse, it could make sense to just Imperm this Dormouse here, because even though this deck can play through cards like Imperm and Effect Veiler, this kind of telegraphs to you that they don't have a good normal summon, so this maybe is their only way to play the game. This is something to keep in mind, this is something to be aware of. The best summon, the best starter is a Dormouse. Then I guess the second best one at this moment is kind of like the Underground and then the Gold Sark and then the White Rabbit, but if they have a normal summon, they will always go for a normal summon. Then we have Ash Blossom, where a lot of people say, okay, this is not the greatest cards against Maliss. I kind of disagree, it's okay. There are definitely spots where you can use it. You could, for example, use it on the TB11. This is a weak spot because if they have any extender, they might be able to continue their plays. Also keep in mind, let's say they go for the Dormouse and then they summon the White Rabbit with the Dormouse and they set the TB11. Then they will, for example, use TB11, banish the Dormouse to, in that case, summon the Chessy Cat. If you Ash Blossom that, then they still have 2 bodies because the Dormouse comes back, and 2 bodies means Splash Mage, and Splash Mage means Link 3. So this Ash was basically useless. There's something to keep in mind. If you hit this TB11, then it should be impactful. So if they can still get to a Link 3 body, then just keep the Ash. You can also obviously Ash something like the Allure of Darkness, or what is very cool, using the Ash Blossom on the Chessy Cat. So one line that Maliss can do is normal summon Chessy Cat. If they have any of the other monsters in the hand, like a White Rabbit or a Dormouse, this is very strong because they can activate the effect, banish these, draw 2 cards, and then these can come back to the field via the banishment, obviously. And if you Ash Blossom the Chessy Cat, this could mean that they are stuck with their non-extender in the hand. So let's say they have a Chessy Cat and they have a Dormouse and they decide to go for the Chessy Cat, which is way more risky than just going for the Dormouse, because Dormouse you can't Ash Blossom, you can only Imperm her. But let's say he does it. This is a greedier line. It goes Chessy Cat, activates it, and you Ash it, then this Dormouse is stuck in the hand, and if these are the only cards that he can use to play, then you have stopped him here. So I think it's actually nice. Obviously you're also basically Ash Blossoming a Pot of Greed, and I think a lot of people are in general Ash Blossoming triple tactic talent, so why wouldn't you Ash Blossom the Chessy Cat? So Ash Blossom on Allure or on Chessy Cat I think is a very nice option, but there are also other options. Another thing that you could potentially Ash Blossom is actually the White Binder, because White Binder says that she can be, so if she's banished, she can come back to the field via special summon banishment, pay 900 life points, and then you draw a card. And because you draw a card, you can Ash Blossom the entire effect, which means that the White Binder will stay in the banishment. In that sense that she can still come back via the GVC06 from the banishment, it doesn't really matter, but obviously you keep them of an entire Link 3 body that they could use to go, I don't know, into an Appaloosa or maybe into a Firewall Dragon. Obviously, and this is once again where you have to understand what the board already looks like, maybe they don't need this body. So you definitely have to understand how the board looks like. Let's say they have an Appaloosa and they have, I don't know, let's say a Red Ransom on field. Then it's very important for them to get another body, because otherwise this Red Ransom would just be stuck on the field, right? Because what they then would optimally want to do is go Red Ransom body and White Binder body that came back into a Firewall Dragon. At this point, this would be a very nice Ash. And keep in mind that the March Hare, so let's say they have a March Hare in the hand, but they don't have this Revive trap on the field, right? The March Hare can only banish from the graveyard. So if you keep the White Binder in the banishment via the Ash Blossom, then they can't use the March Hare to banish it. They can use the trap though to get it back. So this also depends on what you see on the field, and this is where once again I would definitely suggest you go check the combo guide out, just that you understand how the deck works. And then there's another great Ash target. So if you can't really find a good potential spot on your opponent's first turn, your opponent has not used Chassis, has not used Allure, and maybe the White Binder wasn't that effective, Ash Blossoming the White Binder, then you can also Ash Blossom the Banishment Trap. If you're not aware, this trap adds a Maliss monster to the hand, and then if you control a Maliss Link monster, you can banish a card non-targeting. Very strong effect, and you can Ash this once again, like with the White Binder. If an effect includes an effect that can draw a card or can add a card to the hand, you can Ash it and the entire effect will not go through. So you could keep the Ash Blossom for your opponent's turn and thereby basically -1 interruption your opponent, getting rid of this interruption and also of some follow-up. So I think these are the prime targets to use the Ash Blossom. So if my opponent would go for a Chassis or for a Allure of Darkness, I would definitely Ash this. If I can't find a good spot on my opponent's first turn, it's very likely, because I haven't really hand-trapped him obviously then, that he goes to the MTP7, which I can then Ash Blossom. Then we have Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence. I think in most cases, so if you're not aware, this is something important to say here, your Maliss opponent can dodge these cards via, for example, the TB, MTP or GVC. Because if you're not aware, all of these traps can be activated the turn they are set by banishing a Maliss monster. So let's, for example, say I normal summon Dormouse, and then I set something like the TB11 on my field. So if I activate my Dormouse effect now and you go Imperm on this, I can chain the TB11, banish the Dormouse, summon something from the deck, and my Dormouse will still go through because it's in the banishment at this point. So this is where these traps can definitely make something like Imperm and Effect Veiler less effective. But nevertheless, I think if, for example, your opponent starts with a Dormouse, I personally would go ahead and use the Imperm or the Effect Veiler on the starter, especially if it seems to be a bad starter like the Chassis Cat. So if they go Chassis Cat, want to activate Chassis Cat's effect, then even if they have an extender, you have stopped a draw 2. And once again, if they have a Chassis Cat, this normally means that they need to banish another Maliss name from the hand to continue the plays. And if you Imperm and Effect Veiler this is kind of nice. So I would basically always hit these Maliss base monsters with an Imperm and an Effect Veiler. And I also would not really be scared of these cards here, because only the TB11 really works well when it comes to dodging. For example, the GVC06, you can't dodge with this card, since if I go Dormouse normal summon and then I set my GVC06 and then activate Dormouse, I don't have a Maliss card in the graveyard or banishment that I can even target with this, so I can't use this to dodge. And with the MTP07, let's say I normal summon my Dormouse, and then you go Imperm on the Dormouse, I activate my MTP to dodge, I can banish my Dormouse, and I will get the banish from the Dormouse, but the card that I will add to the hand, I can't normal summon. In this case, I guess you can go for the March here, which extends a bit. So these two cards can basically dodge an Imperm and an Effect Veiler, but in my opinion, it's still actually a nice spot to just hit the normal summon starter here. Other options, so other targets that you can hit is definitely the White Binder, because White Binder firstly banishes cards from the graveyard. This is especially important if you see that your opponent needs to banish some of the Maliss monsters from the graveyard. So let's, for example, say there's a Red Ransom in the graveyard that has not yet come back from the banishment, and he targets this with a White Binder, then it can obviously be very effective to hit the White Binder, because also hitting the White Binder means that maybe your opponent cannot use White Binder's second effect to set a trap, which also is very impactful. And I say maybe because if they can get rid of the White Binder from the field and get it back, then they can obviously once again activate this set the trap effect, right? So hitting White Binder can also be very effective. Sometimes hitting the Red Ransom can also be because a lot of the combo lines need the field spell to extend, but this is basically where you kind of play blind. If your opponent has an extender, this was not really impactful. But same goes for the base monsters, and this is where Maliss is really good at playing through something like Imperm and Effect Veiler. Once again, I would just go gamble, I guess, and hit the first thing they summon. So for example, they summon a Dormouse, I hit this with an Imperm, and then they either have to have a Maliss in Underground, a Gold Sark, a March Hare, or maybe something like the Allure of Darkness, which already you see that there are a lot of ways. A Bystial would also be fine to extend here, and this is why these hand traps are not that great. You could also obviously keep your Infinite Impermanence for the end board, and then if he ends on, I don't know, Firewall Dragon Darkfluid, you could, for example, can you actually? No, Firewall Dragon Darkfluid isn't a good target, but they will end up on the Appaloosa, and another good thing that you can do is just Imperm the Appaloosa, and then you get rid of 2 monster negates, or Imperm, for example, the Firewall Dragon, so they can't bounce. So this is also what you could do, and once again, I think this depends a bit on how you read their hand. So once again, a Chassis Cat normal normal summon basically tells you they need to resolve this effect, so hit this. Hitting a Dormouse with an Imperm is way more dangerous, I would say, but something I would normally do, especially if you have another hand trap that can basically negate another follow-up card, right? Because then they would need another follow-up. So let's say they have another underground, you can somehow, I don't know, maybe bell this, and then they also have a gold suck, or they need a gold suck to continue the plays. But yeah, they are not that great. We have Dominus Inputs, which is a very, very strong card against Maliss. I think one of the best things that you can hit is if they have this situation where they have a Splash Mage, need to revive something, and if you also have a trap in graveyard, because then not only don't they get their body back, but also Splash Mage will die, which this is very important. This is a Link 2 body that can go into the Link 3s, obviously. You can also Dominus Impulse something that wants to come back from the banishment, so let's say they banish their Red Ransom to continue their plays, because Red Ransom is a body in herself, and she can banish another Maliss monster, so generates another body. If you can impulse that, that can also be very, very effective. Same goes for the White Binder, but in some instances you can also just impulse any of the Maliss base monsters that want to come back from the banishment. So if you see a situation where they definitely need this Maliss monster to come back, where they need this Maliss body, you can impulse this, and this is very effective. Same goes for the Dominus Purge. This is definitely more effective if there's another trap in the graveyard, so that you can destroy the monster. Let's say they search with the Red Ransom, you destroy the Red Ransom and negate the search. This is very impactful, obviously. Other than that, you could, for example, also hit the Jessie-Cat with the Dominus Purge so that they can't draw and destroy the body. Maybe that would be great, but these are the only main targets. And I guess this depends. If he opens with a Jessie-Cat, I would definitely hit him with the Purge here, because this also hinders him from banishing, which might be the more important factor of his play, because once again, Jessie-Cat, he might have a Dormouse or a White Rabbit in the hand, or something like the Allure. These are definitely targets I would just Purge. It's not that difficult to use Purge against Maliss. It's kind of obvious, I would say, because there are not that many cards that actually search. Once again, you can also hit this, by the way, but yeah, keep this in mind. If you have no good target on your first turn, then you might just keep this for the MTPO7. Then we come to Nibiru, and this is one of the most trickiest things to explain, I guess. This really depends on the board situation. I guess you can say that once this Red Ransom has come back to the field, so if the Red Ransom effect to come back to the field and banish another Cybers monster has resolved, this is most likely one of the best spots to use this Nibiru. I would not really hold this for the opponent's turn, because yes, they summon a lot, but if they do it correctly, they won't summon 5 times. So this is, I guess, if you want like an easy guide, then you should wait for the Red Ransom to resolve in order to use your Nibiru, because this oftentimes signals a weak spot, but doesn't have to be the case. Keep in mind that with any Link 3 body and another normal body, they can make an Appaloosa, so you really have to be aware of this. For example, if they have a Red Ransom on the field and a Jessie-Cat, and they have added the field spell with the Red Ransom, then you basically have to use your Nib there, otherwise there is an Appaloosa, and then they have to continue with the field spell, which they can actually, which is why with Marcher in the game and with Appaloosa in the game, Nib is not as effective against Maliss as it was in the TCG, where we had no Appaloosa. So one thing to always keep in mind with the Nib is, can they make an Appaloosa, and can the other important thing is, can they make an Appaloosa and it makes sense? So for example, if they have the Red Ransom and another body that can make an Appaloosa, but they have no way, at least that you have seen, that they can make or banish this Red Ransom afterwards, because I don't know, you have Ash, this Red Ransom, the field spell is not in the hand, and you are assuming there is no way that they can banish Red Ransom, then it might be very sensible to use the Nibiru there, because then they can't continue their plays. But this is, once again, I don't know, you play against a 5-card hand and you might only know a few cards in the hand, so this is also a bit gambly, I guess. You could also wait for the end board if they, for example, end on a Firewall Dragon Darkfluid, only on a Firewall Dragon Darkfluid, but since we have this Appaloosa in the game, this doesn't really make sense. So I guess the most useful point is to just wait out the Red Ransom. One thing to note here is, if they start with something like the White Rabbit, which is not the optimal line here, they will need to play into Nibiru. So if you have the chance to hit like 3 monsters on the field before they can make a Link 3 body, and they are already have 5 summons, this is obviously the best time to use Nibiru. So let's say they start with the White Rabbit, they get, let's say, the TB11, banish the White Rabbit, get the Dormouse to the field, White Rabbit comes back. These are 3 summons. And then they have to go into the Splash Mage, 4th summon, and then revive one of these bodies, 5 summons. At this point, this is by far the best time to use the Nibiru, because then you keep them off this Link 3 body. There are ways that they can extend, but this is definitely the most optimal time. So if they have a combo where they can't get to the Red Ransom before 5 summons, then obviously always nip there. Then we have something like the Ghost Bell, which is actually kind of an effective hand trap against this deck. You could, for example, Ghost Bell the GVC06 or the March Hare, and these are the ways that the Maliss player uses to basically play on your turn, right? By using GVC06 to revive Whitebinder, or by using the March Hare to banish the Whitebinder. Keep in mind though that if you have already seen him adding back the March Hare to the hand and they have the trap, then obviously your Ghost Bell isn't that great there, because you can only hit one of these and the other one can then continue. You can also, and I think this is another good spot to use a Ghost Bell. I wouldn't play Ghost Bell in the main deck, honestly, but if you want to, you can. It's definitely not the worst thing against Maliss. You can also Ghost Bell Maliss in the Underground. And you can also Ghost Bell a Gold Sarcophagus, I think. Let me quickly read this. Banish a card from the graveyard. No, you can't, because banish a card from the graveyard. This is why you can hit the Underground, because this banishes from the graveyard, but not the Gold Sarc, because it banishes from the deck, actually. But yeah, you can also, for example, Ghost Bell Bystial if you see that they need the Bystial in order to banish one of the Bellis monsters in the graveyard to create another body for a Link 3. Then you can also go ahead and Ghost Bell a potential Bystial, a potential March Hare. These are obviously the best targets. And you can also Ghost Bell Whitebinder, which can also be very effective. I guess now that I think about it, if your opponent has the March Hare on your turn and the GVC06, you might just hold this Ghost Bell for the Whitebinder, and then you just hit the Whitebinder's effect to banish everything, because this is basically hitting this or this, but more effective because this is the choke point. So in terms of activating this on your turn, or waiting with this for your turn, just hit the Whitebinder with this so that they then cannot banish the Red Ransom, maybe the Crypta that they have engraved. And if they can't banish the Red Ransom or the White Rabbit, they can't get to the White Rabbit, which means they can't get to the banishment trap. Once again, if this is confusing to you, check out the guide, please. Then we have Ghost Ogre, which is, I guess, an okay card against this deck. For example, what is actually quite nice, well, once again, okay, we have the Appaloosa, so it's not really that nice. You can hit the Appaloosa on your turn, so once again, you could keep this for your turn. If they activate the Appaloosa, you hit this, and then you have basically negated a monster negate. If they do not have the Appaloosa on the end board and they have the Firewall during darkfluid, this is a very effective Ghost Ogre, because they will still send the Cyber's Desire Worm to the grave, but this can only negate a spell trap if there's a Link 5 Cyber's monster on the field, and obviously the Ogre destroys this. So this is one of the most effective usages if they don't have an Appaloosa, which if they have this Tempest Terahertz is very unlikely, but can be the case. Another thing that you can obviously hit with a Ghost Ogre would be one of the Maliss Link 3 monsters when they activate their effects, which is nice because then you basically kill a Link 3 body that they could have been using to go into an Appaloosa or something like this. So let's say, for example, you hit this Red Ransom, this goes to the grave, then at this point they can't really make an Appaloosa, which might mean that they need to summon more times and that your Nibiru is live. So the Ghost Ogre in combination with a Nibiru can be very, very helpful. And now let's talk about some board breakers here. I think board breakers in general are not that great against Maliss, but there are better and worse ones. One of the worst ones is the Dark Ruler, because the problem is that you really want to kill the Maliss opponent. If you have seen the combo guide, you have seen how much follow-up this deck can generate. If you don't kill the deck or basically hit it down to a point where it doesn't have a lot of follow-up, then you will lose the game for sure on the follow-up turn. This is a problem, and so Dark Ruler basically saying that you can't deal damage is really bad. Also, and this is something to understand, a lot of the Maliss interruption is also in the graveyard, right? Okay, you might have an Appaloosa on the field and maybe the Firewall Dragon Darkfluid, which Dark Ruler is super bad against this Firewall Dragon because normally your Maliss opponent has this already in the grave, and they will just, in the draw phase, okay, not send the aggregator, I guess. Okay, let me correct myself here. So yeah, it is kind of effective, but you still have this spell trap negate in the graveyard, but then your Darkfluid couldn't send this, for example, which is nice, and you would get rid of this Appaloosa. But unfortunately, they still still have probably the GVC06 and the Marcher banishing the White Binder. White Binder banishes Dormouse, gets the White Rabbit, gets the Banishment Trap, maybe gets a Cryptor, and this all happens afterwards. So a lot of the interruption, like with Fire King actually, is in the graveyard and comes later on, or maybe in the hand. And then they will generate a lot of follow-up. You can't kill them because 0 damage, and so it's super, super bad. Then we have Evenly Matched, which I think is also not that great. Once again, a lot of the stuff is in the graveyard. Obviously, Evenly Matched, that's kind of nice. You can get rid of some back row. That's cool, I guess, with the Evenly Matched, like getting rid of Imperm or maybe a Impulse if it is there. But once again, here you won't kill the opponent, and this is the biggest problem. And there's stuff in the graveyard. They could just keep the GVC on the field, on maybe not even. They could also keep, let's say, an Appaloosa on the field if they have a Marcher in the hand. Then they still have an Appaloosa, and then they go Marcher, banish White Binder, banish Ransom, banish Cryptor, White Rabbit, get the trap here, and then they not even might most likely stop you on your turn, but they also have the entire follow-up, and then you lost the game because you have skipped your battle phase, basically. So Evenly Matched, not that great. Lightning Storm can be kind of nice if they have a lot of back row, I would say. Also, if they have these in attack position, I guess it's also not bad, but they have this one in the graveyard to negate it, basically, if they have gone for this. You can kill the back row, which forces them to basically waste this White Binder banish. So if this is in the back row and you Lightstorm this, then obviously they have to activate this if they don't have a Marcher in the hand, which makes this even less effective in some situations. And then they just bring back the White Binder, banish everything, which has the upside that they can't use the White Binder at an optimal point, which would be, for example, if you have Fiendsmith stuff in your graveyard, they want to use White Binder to remove this. So you force a White Binder out early, I guess, and you might get rid of something like Imperm or Dominus Impulse, but also not super great. I think the best one is the Forbidden Droplet, because this is more flexible. You can use this at any point, and you can make it so that, for example, the Neo Tempest Darkfluid or the Cyber's Desave Worm cannot react to this. This could be very helpful if your opponent summons a White Binder and wants to banish a lot of stuff from the graveyard to continue the plays and get follow-up. If you then go for Forbidden Droplet and maybe Droplet the White Binder as well as the Appaloosa, for example, this can be very, very strong, because not only do you get rid of a lot of interruption at this point, but you also basically get rid of the follow-up of your opponent. Obviously, if he did not only have the GVC or the Marcher to revive the White Binder, but also has the other one, then he can still banish the Ransom. Ransom can still banish the Rabbit, and Rabbit can still get the MTPO7. But I think in terms of Boardbreakers, Droplet is actually the best one. But overall, I have to say Boardbreakers not that great. I think there are some kind of impactful hand traps if you know where to use them. So these can be good to stop. Dominus Impulse definitely great. Bystials can be very good. Dominus, the Artifact Lancia has obviously a kill card. If you can hit the right spot, and Ash Blossom can be nice, but I think this is one of the strengths of Maliss, especially here in Master Duel, especially with this Appaloosa Nip thing here in Master Duel, where a lot of hand traps are not super impactful against Maliss. We have some that are very impactful, like the Artifact Lancia, or you could play the Chaos Hunter. These are cards that totally shut down the deck. Chaos Hunter, right? These are two cards that basically say your opponent loses the game, your Maliss opponent, kind of. And all of these other hand traps are a bit more soft, and this is the big problem with Maliss, or where Maliss is so good. But now you kind of understand where to use these hand traps. This is something you have to learn. Check out the combo guide. I can only mention this once again. This is not only advertisement for myself, but you really have to understand how the deck works in order to understand where to hit it and what could be in the hand of your opponent, especially, and this is one of the most important things once again, that you understand what the opener means, right? And Maliss and Underguard opener means that there is probably no good normal summon in the hand, which makes it way, way more useful to hit something like this, or maybe the first one that comes to the field after the Maliss and Underground. So keep this in mind. If you have any more questions or any suggestions, let me know in the comments. Hopefully this helps you, and I wish you a lot of fun playing the new meta.